So welcome to this session on hierarchy and hierarchy meets evolution. I was just saying the design on the left-hand side of this screen looks a bit creepy, doesn't it? Let's just find out a bit more about the advantages and disadvantages of hierarchy. I'd like to just, everybody who's coming in is going to go off camera, which is great, and onto mute so that we can focus on our panelists. And I'd like to introduce to you who these panelists are. So we have from Poland, we have Anna. Anna worked for McKinsey and was actually the first organizational expert for McKinsey in Central Eastern Europe. So I think you bring an excellent perspective to this discussion. We have Kevin Crenshaw, who is based in the US. He's an author of a book called Never Boss, which is about great leadership by letting go. And he's an executive coach and works as an external COO. Is that how you describe yourself, Kevin?
Yes.
Yeah, good, good. Based in the UK, we have Catherine Barnard. I'm going to call Catherine Cat. She's co-founder of Working the Future, which helps leaders understand and adapt to different landscapes. So there's a lot that Catherine's got to bring into the discussion. And Mike Klein of Changing the Terms is also on our panel, and he's author of From Lincoln to LinkedIn. He's one of the top 10 global communication influencers. He's an international consultant, and he's from the US, has worked all over Europe, and is now based in sunny Iceland. So welcome everybody, and I'd like to say that we're just going to go through some questions. We're just going to have a discussion, and then you can put stuff into chat and we'll take questions and that kind of thing. So before I move further, I want to explain why Mirror Mirror is hosting this event and why we've got anything to do with it, actually. My name is Lindsay Outen-Bogard, and I'm running an organization called Mirror Mirror, which is an alignment diagnostic tool and process in one. What we do is we identify, measure and address alignment gaps at the team level. It helps people, as it says here on the slide, helps people align to the vision and strategy of the organization as well as with each other, which is a crucial part of the mix. It's all about engagement and empowerment. We seek to add clarity and ownership, and we seek to take out cost and risk. So the challenge that we see in organizations is that you don't just put people together with the relevant knowledge. People actually face the challenge of integrating their perspectives on what's going on, what the strategy is and what they need to be doing. And they face a second challenge of collaborating as a unit to be effective. So it's all very easy in this part of the world and through the sort of mirror lens to see that organizations that run a hierarchical sort of business model, or they operate from a hierarchical perspective, don't support much alignment. And I think that will be one of my questions. I'm going to stop sharing and go straight on to that now, actually, because, you know, if we think about alignment today being about shared mental models and the ability to understand each other's perspectives, is it possible actually to achieve alignment when in hierarchical organizations people are more told to do things and maybe scared to speak up? And I might like to start posing that question, if I may, to Anna. So from your perspective, you know, do hierarchical models support alignment, I suppose, is the first question.
Well, I think, you know, it starts with our own understanding of what hierarchy is. Like, look, even in this question, we are a little bit loaded, right? Saying, well, it's bad. I think, you know, we should be just conscious and very deliberate about using various organizational models as much as cultures, you know, creating the culture. You know, adding a bit of spice from Central Eastern Europe, I think so far we haven't been, you know, taught and experienced in doing it. The corporate cultures, business cultures here have been influenced by multinationals, and that was great education with a lot of influence from the Western Anglo-Saxon world. But we also have our, you know, old tradition of bottom-up entrepreneurship. So now I think, you know, we can see those two types mixing. And as long as I see leaders being conscious about what they are doing and trying, to take the best from, what I need to organize in a very army-like way, and what I need to organize in a very free, almost, artistic spirit manner, they succeed. But it also has to be based on trust. And I think, we are going to elaborate more on that later on good flow of information and open-mindedness. I'll pause here. I think we had previously a bit of discussion with Kat as well, but I don't know, Kat, if you want to add to that.
Well, I guess it's obviously caveated with this is such a huge topic, and I think that regrettably, and I agree with what you just said, Anna, about we have top-down and bottom-up approaches, and we also need to to fully understand and answer this question. We kind of need to understand where leaders get their leadership credentials from. Are they learning from others? Are they learning from textbooks? Are they copying role modeled behaviors and so on? But for me, what is really fascinating is that the dynamic of the pace of change then goes on to amplify the positives and the negatives. And I think you said something right at the start about conscious behavior, and I'm endlessly fascinated by whether or not any of us are consciously behaving in business today, because we are so subjected to endless overload of information. And I think we knee-jerk a lot of the time.
Okay, so Anna, you were talking, Mike, sorry, you don't want to cut you off.
Well, that ties into a bigger question, which is the nature of work itself. I mean, we could talk till we're blue in the face about, about a conceptual view of hierarchy. But as I see it, it's really a question of, what's the nature of the work, the nature of the organization, the nature of the relationship between people and their organizations. And in what cases are hierarchies genuinely still fit for purpose? And to what extent are they still in place, even if they're not necessarily the most optimal way for doing the work? And so I think that's kind of the bowl in which we're really starting to deal, with the question, if you will.
Well, those are really good questions, actually. I mean, so maybe if I can, come back at one of those, sort of just come into another of those questions. Will there always be a place for hierarchical organizations? And why? Big questions. Kevin, do you have a response to that one?
Well, I do. Thank you for asking me. So what I'm hearing is this subtext about hierarchies are good, hierarchies are bad, empowerment is good, perhaps. I personally don't think I think it's a false dichotomy. Okay, I think the point is not whether there are advantages to hierarchy. Hierarchy gives you stability, safety, predictability, especially clarity in an organization. And I don't think the choice is either between hierarchy and empowerment. It's between hierarchy and freedom. And freedom gives more speed, agility, and innovation in an organization. But I think a better question is, what would it take to make a hierarchy empowering? Is it possible to have a hierarchy so you have the advantages of the stability, safety, and clarity, and you have the empowerment, the freedom, the speed, the agility of that kind of an organization? And I will resoundingly say, yes, it is. And that's what we live in practice. My book is entitled Never Bust Leadership by Letting Go, but we're not saying get rid of the hierarchy. We're saying change the purpose of the hierarchy so that the mission of the leaders is to create empowered leaders who create more empowered leaders. And you can do that.
And I, adding to that a little bit, I believe that actually, hierarchy allows for a lot of freedom, but it kind of, puts it in a more defined boxes. So for instance, even from career perspective, in a very well-defined hierarchical organization, you sort of know where you are going from the start. Versus if you are, even in a small organization, in a startup, or in a strategic team in a bigger organization, you might be moving around and you have more freedom to kind of, create your career. So I've seen hierarchical organizations that were not destroying hierarchy per se, but they were sort of questioning people's mindsets about, what hierarchy means to them and where hierarchy is constraining their freedom, mostly from their own attitude perspective. And I think, for instance, career paths have been recently example of breaking the hierarchy in a smart way.
And I think, the temptation to put this kind of binary empowerment is good, hierarchy is bad, which is very cliched view of the world. But I think the temptation to do that is because there is this piece about the fact that, hierarchy does retain the power and the status and this feeling of people think that they're more superior at the top. And we would be naive if we didn't say that that doesn't happen.
Oh, yeah. May I comment on that?
Sure.
An old U.S. Western cowboy movie called Shane has a famous line in it. A retired gunslinger says, "A gun is a tool. It's no better or worse than the hand that holds it." And I used to believe that, and I don't anymore. A gun is power. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And in order to make a gun safe, it's the same with hierarchy. In order to make a hierarchy safe, there have to be checks and balances, and you have to be very careful how it's used. And the nature of power, if it's unchecked and unbalanced, if there's no universal accountability, it will be abused. Power without transparency and accountability will become tyranny. And that's what a hierarchy is. So, how do you define the hierarchy and hold that hierarchy accountable to this new purpose so that it doesn't become a dictatorship? And in our experience, it's possible to do. And in fact, it's easy to do once you see the principles behind that. So hopefully we'll talk more about what some of those principles are as we go through this discussion.
Right. And, you would have to have a very well-meaning, ethical, fair-minded sense of leadership in an organization for hierarchy and empowerment to be balanced in whatever ways necessary, right, Mike?
Well, it's interesting that you say that, and you use the term dictatorship to describe the fundamental nature of hierarchy, because I've spent an inordinate amount of time in family-owned companies, and what I've found is that there's a really funny relationship between employees, managers, and owners in these family-owned companies. That that the hierarchy is kind of divinely ordained. You derive your power from the almighty family. And in return, these companies have a tendency to offer relatively high degrees of security and stability. And so you give up your freedom in return for being taken care of. And there's rituals right down to like all managers have to wear blue suits every day. As I saw in one company in which I worked a number of years ago. And it's, it's more than just simply governance and execution and accountability. There is an added level of monarchical, not thinking, but in monarchical, there's a monarchical element of the culture that this kind of hierarchy adds to. And what I'm finding with this particular company is that most of the people who are intelligent and who have initiative have left the company that I've worked with.
Right.
It's great. This is a great culture for people who want to be protected to a certain extent, but not necessarily a great culture for people who want to innovate.
And at the same time, sometimes you've got closely held companies where that leader sees the vision of creating an empowering organization and retaining a hierarchy, And they want it because one of the most surprising things about empowering your people is that it empowers you. You can create a responsive, agile organization where people don't check their brains at the door. They all think together. And so this monarchical leader can say, they have the power to say, we're changing the rules here. We are now creating an empowering leadership culture. Here's how we're doing it. Here's how we're making sure we stay on track with that. And you mentioned, the idea of relying on fair-mindedness. You can't do that. If you just rely on fair-mindedness, it's going to reduce to its lowest common denominator, and people are going to use the power. So you have ways of measuring. How are we leading? Simple ways of holding each other accountable, having a great discussion of, are you on the leadership level that you want to be at right now? And that's rule number one. If you want to give that power away, is you say, from now on, everyone in this company is accountable to the standards of this company to everybody else, regardless of title or position. We are now accountable to principles, not personalities. The leader at the top can say that.
But it's almost as if organizations have to have a balance rather than just be more hierarchical, because this thing that you talked about, Mike, where people felt that they were being taken care of, that doesn't happen so much anymore. I mean, job security isn't what it used to be. And also, with such a complex world that we've got today, the business isn't in such a good position if people don't have the freedom to make their own decisions and respond to that complexity. So it's almost as if, do you think that balance is a must, that's where we're going?
I don't think it's where we're going. I think it's where we've been. Organizations historically have sought, and the whole concept of employee engagement, I used to call it the engagement of the ring, where literally it was an engagement ring. You offered your body and soul to the organization, and in return, you expected the organization to take care of you, for as long as you were interested in that. And the organization in return felt it had the ability to basically take from you what it could during that process. And we are moving towards more transactional workplace relationships. We are moving towards not only transactional relationships, but in some cases purpose-based, and in some cases attempts at purpose-based where the stated purpose and the real purpose aren't exactly aligned with each other, which kind of adds up to the mother of all alignment issues. If how do you align with the organization if the organization isn't aligned with itself? But it's also about the nature of the work. It's like if you're in a fish processing plant 50 miles up the road in Reykjavik, there isn't that much discretion. There isn't that much need to have a great deal of freedom. You cut the fish, you clean the fish, you pack the fish. There are some ways to do it more humanely, more environmentally, whatever, but there's not that much difference. There's not that much discretion in the role. Does that lend itself to hierarchy? It probably does. Making software is a somewhat different ballgame.
Yeah, indeed. It's too easy to generalize. We've got to stop generalizing. Kat, what do you think about all of this?
I think one of the major game changers in the world of work is the arrival and influence of the internet, and how that has changed socio-cultural attitudes towards work. Because 20 years ago, 25 years ago, if you went into a workplace, you only had the perspective, you only had the experience of that one place in which you worked, and the only benchmark that you were able to compare it to was any other place that you had worked, or maybe a conversation that you might have with a friend about the place that they worked at over coffee, over a glass of wine. Whereas now we live in this really transparent world where two things are at play. One is we all have a platform and a voice. The internet has given each and every one of us a platform and a voice. And the other thing is, you know, if you think about the proliferation of information that is available on the internet today, we can draw comparisons of our workplace against hundreds, if not thousands, of other workplaces, and whether or not we gain an accurate representation of what it's like to be somewhere else, we build a picture based on what other people have told. Glassdoor is a really interesting phenomenon. The fact that there is a website where employees write about their own experience of having worked somewhere. So fundamentally, what I believe we have is a work construct in the upper echelons of many organizations where senior executives are still operating in a quasi command and control mentality, whereas modern workers are all observant, and they know what they'll tolerate and they know what they won't tolerate, and they'll hold you to account, whether they share that with you or not, but they will hold you to account, and they will compare you to the next person. The other thing that I think is really interesting is, 25 years ago, there weren't that many work influencers out there. You had, you know, your old school, you had your Tom Peters and your McKinsey consultants, but there was only a finite amount of literature written about what makes a good workplace. And now it's like a tsunami of information that we can pick and choose from. So I think the interesting piece is that my impression is that too many leaders have an outdated impression of what is required of leadership, and it goes back to that point at the start of the conversation of you know, a done to, a told to, whereas actually now, you know, it's a 360 prism in which a leader operates. And I think we'll see, as a consequence of the lockdown and these imminent redundancies that I think we're all expecting, how organizations handle redundancies in the transparent COVID era will have a massive impact on future bottom line outcomes, because everyone's watching, everyone's waiting, and there's nowhere to hide because we now live inside the internet, right?
So do you think that people who in a you know, who haven't been in business for so long, who are in a younger generation, are just working, they're just working in this 360 world, this curious, observing sort of world that's much more open? Do you think they will automatically become leaders who are less driven by fear, if you like, about how to interact and empower, that, you know?
I think the younger members of our working communities will be guided by instances and scenarios. You know, they'll all have seen somebody who's crashed and burned on social media. You have these influencers who gain overnight, well, to our old fogey eyes, overnight notoriety, and will make some kind of mistake, and overnight they're trashed. And I think it's ingrained into a younger person's psyche that your online behavior can make or break you. And I think that then lends itself to a far deeper awareness of transparency in a way that perhaps older generations aren't as familiar or comfortable with.
So perhaps we'd better get onto these principles. I mean, Kevin, you talked about principles, and there are ways that leaders can get the best of both worlds, according to their own situation, of course. And everybody's got a unique business situation. There is no one model that will work. But on the other hand, there's principles that people can use. What do you say about those principles?
Well, principles are powerful. Principles are fundamental truths about human nature and human interaction that are packaged and ready for application. They're easy to remember. They're easy for people to use to make independent decisions. And while there's not one universal model, perhaps, or one universal set of principles, there is a core set of principles that in my experience, we have found works over and over and over again.
Can you share anything of those?
Yeah, we can share some of these. I don't have a list of the principles here, but for example, in an ideal empowering organization, you want to communicate these principles to everyone, and you want people to speak them regularly. You know you're doing your job in an empowering organization because you'll hear people in a meeting say, well, the principle is what we measure improves. So we need to measure this. The principle is we need to manage risk, not eliminate it. It's too expensive to eliminate. The principle is progress, not perfection. We need to be agile. And agile means we get it out there. It must not be perfect at first. We get it out there quickly and we improve it rapidly based on actual data. And they'll say, remember guys, we're not going for consensus in this meeting. We're going for buy-in, which means we can 70% agree and see how well it's working. These are fundamental principles. And when you teach those to an organization instead of rules, people can remember them. And a set of 10 or 15 principles can provide a very strong alignment within the organization, which creates rules that makes it possible for people to share the information, like you talk about.
So what we're talking about is you would have a very strong frame within which you give people to operate. But then within that frame, they have these principles and are able to be much more empowered to determine how they execute within that frame, right?
I'd call it a very strong foundation. Foundational principles of here we practice empowering leadership. And there's a model that we've built based on what other organizations in the world have done when they've succeeded at creating an empowering hierarchy and what they didn't have when they failed. And right at the basis of this is a vanilla culture level that says empowering leadership and what it means, universal safety, and what that means. Very, very simple principles: mutual respect, mutual empathy, mutual purpose. And then one of the foundational things we change is the meetings. You change to a collaborative meeting agenda instead of a manager imposed agenda. And those three things just sort of begin to unleash the floodgates of empowerment. Then you have to start putting other things in place. What are the principles? What's the structure? How do we make sure we've got the capability, et cetera?
Well, it would be great if you could put a link into the chat or something about where people could go for more information on that. But in the meantime, perhaps I can throw a question out there, which is, that's a really great vision. And it's probably easier said than done, although certainly achievable in your view. And, let's just take, though, an organization that is operating a very strong top-down model and doesn't have that vision. What's the future for the extremely hierarchical model? Anna, you've got your hand up. Did you want to address that question, or?
I wanted to challenge Kevin a little bit, and maybe that sort of, the question you raised is a good challenge for all of us, because I've worked with like old state-owned, like super hierarchical and in a negative way, like siloed organizations, and then I worked with startups. And sort of, at the beginning, they are very free. They are very, hey, let's just go get them, no risk, because in the end, like if we fail, well, tough luck. But what I find out inevitably in both of those organizations, there will be people at some point who will say, why do I do it? Because the boss said so, or, because it was always done this way. Or I cannot do this. This is the worst, like the sentence to hear in any type of organization, because there comes the confirmation bias. As leaders, we create a certain model with good intentions. I mean, we want our organizations operating effectively in like hierarchical, empowering way, either way. But then there will be people who feel and leave the negatives of that. And I think as long as we stay like vigilant, like we notice this, and we can have that various mechanism for that, because obviously all of us have some sort of blind spots. So having feedback flows, having some sort of, right now the beauty of tech is you can have all those analytical tools like organizational network analytics that I love, because it kind of questions all the assumptions about organizational models we have. I think we can keep the model alive, because even if you, for instance, let's take the principles Kevin has been talking about. And let's take values that organizations like, you know, put in. Sometimes those are the same. Like, we want to be collaborative. This is how our meetings work. And you put it in everyday life, and it works like this for a while, and then you grow, and then you are no longer 500 people, you are 50,000 people globally. And how do you maintain this consciously? Or how do you kind of keep on questioning yourself and saying, well, you know, how do we remain collaborative going forward? So I think for those, so that's a little bit to challenge the fact that, you know, we can make an exercise right now and change something, but I very much believe that we should be also building in like a, you know, a time bomb in the organization and some sort of mechanism to revisit the model, to revisit the way we work, because otherwise as leaders and even as mid-managers, we are very like blinded to the negatives. And then, you know, to your question, you know, very briefly, I think, you know, recently in the COVID kind of environment, we've been talking on a panel with a couple of friends here in Poland, and we said, you know, you need pockets of rebellion. So actually working from home to some extent reduced opportunities to rebel in organization, but I think it made certain people more courageous about, you know, questioning the obvious, about trying new things. So I think if you're a very like hierarchical, blind organizations, you know, deaf to some advice that you are getting, well, you'll just leave, you know, you will operate. It also depends on your sector, on your competitors, on your talent, what the talent does. But if you really like open a little bit, just a little bit, and hear the little voices, I think actually this disruption that is happening here and now offers an opportunity.
Mike, yeah.
The working from home bit is, and the implications of working from home on hiring, I don't think can be underestimated, because it fundamentally changes the nature of the day-to-day, minute-by-minute working relationship. You know, in an office environment in a highly hierarchical company, the managers are constantly prowling around the offices, looking at what people are doing and what, you know, what's going on people's desks. They're looking at, you know, they're kind of listening into people's conversations. When people are able to do their work outside of the office setting, the focus shifts to the actual work that's getting done rather than the process of doing the work. And that's going to change, you know, if it's not going to change the culture of hierarchy, it will at least change the nature of how hierarchy operates so that we have something different. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love Kevin's approach and the way he articulates it and the extent to which there's a, you know, it's built around a shared commitment around these principles so that you don't have the alignment with the alignment issue that we were talking about. But in many organizations, that's not where you're starting. You're starting from the work rather than from the philosophy around the work. And that's why things are going to change. You know, I think that's enough to give us some real hope that things will change for the better, even if they don't necessarily lead to a revolution in the world of hierarchy.
Well, and Mike, you can't, kind of alluding to what you're mentioning there, you can't just change principles. You're also going to have to change the established systems and tools and assumptions that are built into that organization, because those will punish initiative and reward controlling in most organizations. So when we transform a culture, and we do it very fast, 90 to 180 days, okay, in many organizations, we firmly believe from actual experience, if change is slow or painful, you're doing it wrong. You don't understand the fundamental principles, and once we understand the principles, we can do that. We make the culture change, but then we start changing these other built-in structures that handle it wrong, that reward controlling. And there are some keys to doing that. Each change that you make has to be immediately rewarding. People, the managers and the workers have to feel good about it. So for example, in the case of the telework there, we're going to measure outcomes, not hours at desk. Okay, the managers love it because they're getting the results they want. The workers love it because they're measured on actually achieving something. And, you know, accomplishment is very rewarding for people. That's just one example of how it's done.
Kat?
I think, and going back to a point that I think I heard Mike make much earlier on, I think what we're, you know, one of the things that needs to happen as a matter of urgency, both as a consequence of lockdown and remote work, and also the trajectory that we're on in terms of mass workplace automation, you know, each and every organization needs to go through a fundamental exercise of performing a root task analysis, because we are still managing work as if work were an amass of task-based activities, routine and repetitive tasks. And yet that's not the case. In the UK, over 40% of the UK economy is consists of knowledge work now, and knowledge work is ideation and creation and innovation of ideas and thoughts, and that is firstly not repetitive, and secondly it requires a completely different level of autonomy, because you can't think up ideas on prescription, on demand. You know, you can't be managed to create new stuff in that way. So I think this, you know, this whole kind of task analysis is overdue, because if you look at digital transformation and you apply the rules that underpin the theory around digital transformation, any task that is routine and repetitive that will get automated, a piece of code will be written and that will be automated, which frees us humans up to do the more creative, innovative work that requires critical thinking and creativity and curiosity and so on. But, you know, if we're going to foster ideation and creativity and rapid innovation, then the rules by which we lead and manage our organizations have to upgrade, because we can't be creative on demand. I mean, you look back through history and you read autobiographies of like our world's greatest artists, and many of them were broke and bereft for years and years, and then they have this flash of inspiration and they become, you know, known after the event. I think, you know, we need to upgrade our...
We need organisations to become really difficult, horrible workplaces to spurn all of this creativity.
We have to I think we have to upgrade, yeah, what we think about leadership and what we think about management. And there was some I was reading in the chat bar, which I thought was really interesting and really pertinent. You know, there's this thing in psychology which I'm always drawn to called optimal distinctiveness, which is fundamentally that in human nature we have these two opposing views. We crave connection and belonging and fitting in, but we also want to stand out. And so to that point, I think within organizations, we do crave stability and structure and somebody to tell us it's all going to be okay. But in equal measure, we want to be recognized for our own individual attributes and contribution. And I think leaders that can lean into that, and I'm really drawn by something that Anna said throughout the course of this conversation. She said, advertently or inadvertently, she's referred to conscious leadership. And actually, I think that we, you know, as leaders now, we have to pay attention all day long to how we are leading and the impact of our words and actions on others, which underscores, you know, emotionally intelligent leadership.
Wow, who wants to come in off that? That's fantastic, Kat. I mean, it kind of speaks also to what Mike was saying about the fact that where there are routine tasks and when it's not complicated and simple, you don't need so much empowerment. But at the same time, the world is becoming more complex. And so the complexity needs the empowerment, really. But at the same time, you need the belonging and the stability. Absolutely.
Love what you said, Catherine, there. David Marquet has a new book recently called Leadership is Language. And he talks about the two different kinds of work: red work, repeatable work, blue work, thought work. And he makes a really good point. we can, excuse me, we should be clear and conscious about which play we're calling at any given moment. I see Mike nodding his head here. Yeah,
Absolutely.
right now we're heads down. We're going to repeat. Now we're going to stop. How did we do? What did we learn? How are we going to improve it? We see this in agile software development. I'm really glad you mentioned that.
Mike.
And
One thing I want to pick up that Anna said, because I think it shifts the context of the conversation. We're talking a lot about hierarchy and the role of leaders, namely the people at the top, the people in the chain. But Anna picked up on something quickly on organizational network analysis, which is, an area of real passion of mine for the last, 15 years, and an area which I think holds a key towards creating a much more workable answer to this question than just simply fixing the hierarchy, which is, in every organization, you've got vertical leadership and you've got lateral leadership. And organizational network analysis has the ability to find the 3% of the people who drive 90% of the conversation. And once you know who those people are, then it becomes much easier to build workable coalitions so that you're engaging the right people, and the engagement of the right people takes pressure off of the people who are mainly doing the work and driving the more tactical stuff on a day-to-day basis. And I want people to really think about, when they look at this issue of how do you make hierarchy, reinvent hierarchy, what have you, make it work with what's already there rather than completely reinventing it.
If you try to completely re-engineer everything and say, middle management, you're gone, you're going to have a revolt on your hands. And that has happened in organizations that tried to introduce empowering leadership and freedom. So you've got to align with those people and give them a promotion. You're not gone. You're going to have more empowerment to focus on the things you love. We're turning you into coaches, into builders of leaders. You've got to make sure that those people have a direction to move and an outlet. And Catherine, you had mentioned something about these ideas. You can't just be innovative on demand. A great organization, a powering organization, has to have immediate outlets for that innovation when it hits. Because when the golden opportunities arise or the sudden threats appear, you've got to respond quickly. So a good organization has a natural way that people can just seize those things and move on them.
So I'm going to open up. Oh, sorry, Kat, do you want to respond to that?
I was just going to say, I think this is a fascinating time to be in business now, because fundamentally, I think we are all journeymen now. We're on this brave new road, and we don't know where we know some of where we're going or where we would like to get to. Those of us who've thought long and hard about purpose and values and founding principles and so on and so forth are probably slightly further along the road. But actually, the bit that I find so fascinating is fundamentally, and this kind of feeds into the full length and breadth of this conversation, we are all newbies. We're all absolute beginners again, and we have to rethink and I totally agree, by the way, with what Kevin was saying. We can't just throw everything out. We have to apply layers of improvement and better to what has existed before. And we may look back in 2 years' time and go, gosh, didn't we come some way? This is radically different to where we were 2 years ago. But I think there's a thing in here about, those who are prepared to embrace change, both for themselves personally and then for the organizations. And what I've seen, which is just an observation, I'm not saying this is like uniform, but I've seen many people talk about change, but they're not prepared to change themselves. They want change to happen within their organizations, and they want the outcomes, but they don't want to put in the self-work to change and upgrade their mental models, which kind of comes back to the starting point of this discussion, which is we have to have these open conversations about shared understanding and meaning. And actually, when we do that, that creates a layer of trust and transparency and relationship. You know, just checking in that everyone's on the same page. What do we understand by this? That's really empowering, back to another point in the conversation. But I think, you know, the sooner we all accept that we're in this brave new world and it is unmapped and we've got a long way to go, then, you know, relinquishing some previously held perceptions about our own status and position in the in hierarchy, you know, that's a game changer, right?
So there's some really good points, and well, there's a point right at the end of the chat that I want to come to, and one right at the beginning that relate to what you've just said. And the one right at the beginning says maybe hierarchy can be a driver for alignment because there's more clarity then about how the lines of information flow, etc., if it's moved to the right place. And then the one relating to that comment that I thought was really nice in the chat was that we need to distinguish between authority and leadership.
Totally.
That's a really nice way of putting it, actually, because leadership is behavior that can be exercised by everybody, but also help to empower others, while authority is the sort of is what's dragging things down.
The collapse of the distinction between authority and leadership is a source of a fair amount of the suffering that's taking place in the business world. You expect managers to lead, you expect leaders to manage. No, you know, these are fundamentally different things, and some of them do one better than the other. And many organizations haven't given anybody credit for that.
Yeah. So we've got a few minutes left. I want to encourage some more questions. Michael, do you have a question for the panel here or for anybody in particular?
I don't have a question, just an observation really, that I think hierarchy exists everywhere. And, you know, once you get above a certain size, and that size is only a handful of people, a hierarchy exists. And the thing that sets it apart is one person ultimately has to take, or sort of is accountable for the decision, be it driven by money or whatever. So automatically there's a hierarchy in place, and it's how you make it work. The other one is, you know, I've got 20 years of military experience in the long distant past, and I think the military is an environment which exhibits both the very best and the very worst of hierarchy. And when it works badly, we all know what that looks like. When it works well, as it's designed to, it is everything that everyone on the panel has described about being liberating and giving freedom and empowering people. And I think the reason it works is because of what Kevin mentioned, which is that everybody's accountable to everybody else for a set of underlying principles. And everyone knows what those are, what they look like, and how they show up in behavior. And that's the most powerful thing. It's identification with something which is beyond the individual. And so, you know, I'm always slightly skeptical of people who wish to damn hierarchy, because I think it can be made to work, and it can be made to work really well. But it does require constant vigilance.
That's a nice point. Maybe I'd just like to go around and capture any thoughts that any of you got to share on, you know, when hierarchy works well. What does that look like then? A bit more on how we can make hierarchy work well.
Well, I think if you address what Mike was talking about, this difference between managing and leading, I think you have to define leadership. And we've defined empowering leadership, and is it hands-on, is it hands-off? That is the wrong question. We believe that empowering leadership is a process that goes from being hands-on and creating clarity to moving to where you can coach and mentor people so that now you can be hands-off and they have freedom and empowerment. So hierarchy works exceedingly well, and it's extremely important for either stabilizing an out-of-control situation or creating that clarity, and then training and coaching and moving up. So to answer the question, hierarchy works brilliantly there, and you need it, in my opinion, to create that clarity so that the organization can move quickly. But you also want to make it clear that your job ultimately, hierarchy person, is to lead, step up, step back, step away, so that people can use the power that you've given them to do great things on their own.
Thank you, Kevin.
For me, you know, an example, and I'm not talking about extreme, like, you know, small or large organization, but let's take a mid-sized hierarchical organization, is also where the hierarchy actually frees people to focus on what they are best at. And kind of, you know, you have this match of skills or talents or, you know, potential, willingness of people to do that on daily basis. And then you have somebody else, you know, let's say above, with slightly more authority, to refer to Jeff's distinction, regarding, I don't know, you know, budget or negotiation with some external stakeholders. And you allow those other people to focus on what they are best at, and you add this managerial level to focus on something else. But you also have to have trust that, you know, this matching of skill and will and authority is done, you know, properly, or revisited when it does not work. So, you know, I would just venture out to say that. And, you know, example is, you know, recently I'm fascinated by game producing, like, you know, mid-sized companies in Central Eastern Europe. And those are, some of them are, you know, global players. And because they have this creation, you know, what Kat was referring to, also the nature of work, you know, requires more, you know, freedom to create different work pace. And then they have like regular, let's say, business managers, finance managers, etc., etc. And it kind of works well. I don't know where's the limit, but so far so good.
Very good.
To build on what Anna was saying, there's kind of an underlying question which we haven't asked, which is what happens when you get rid of hierarchy? And, you know, aside from the kind of, you know, successful team-based thinking related work activities like you find in the software realm, gaming, things like that, what you often end up with is the replacement of individual leaders with a hierarchy of committees. Whether you've got Zappos, which is all about having lots of different committees, which a lot of people there find extremely cumbersome, to left-wing political parties that have eschewed hierarchy and again are driven heavily by committees. You know, we need to be careful of what we wish for, and rather than wishing the elimination of hierarchy, it's the optimization of hierarchy that I think makes the most sense.
Very good. Kat, would you like to have the last word, because we've just got a couple of minutes left?
I guess my conclusion when I'm reflecting on this conversation over the last hour or so, the piece that I'm really drawn to, and I really value everyone's contribution, but I'm really drawn to this idea that, you know, as we move forward as leaders and we try to future-proof our organizations, it's time for us all to apply more conscious awareness to how we lead, how we set that vision, how we empower people to deliver of their best, and how we check in and make sure that everyone's on board. So right back to the start point, which you and I have spent a long time talking about, Lindsay, alignment. You know, how do my communications land with you? Are you receiving what I'm saying to you in the way that I'm hoping I'm relaying that message to you? And I think it's a really fascinating time, and I'm really motivated by the idea of conscious leadership, where every day my job as a leader is to show up and try to be the best leader that I can be for the people around me. And it's an evolutionary thing.
Well, I mean, when we started off this conversation, I was thinking, oh, is this a little bit too big for us to bite off and chew on? But I think we've come up with, it's just been fascinating, especially, you know, the optimization of hierarchy is a sort of conclusion I think we're sort of agreeing to. We've got leaders who are stepping up, stepping back, and stepping away, which I love the quote of. Conscious awareness, as you put, Kat, about people just having more choice because they are aware of the choices they're making, and then differentiating between authority and leadership to make the most of it and get the best of both worlds. So it's been a fascinating discussion. I want to thank everybody for joining, and I want to thank each of the panelists for participating. I appreciate it. Thanks very much. I'm going to stop recording now.
Thank you.